So welcome everybody, and thank you all for
Oh, it
joining
started. Yeah.
Olivia and I today. Um, and as you're coming in, if you can just make sure your microphones are muted, that would be great. We'll certainly give you an opportunity afterwards to kind of unmute yourself and ask questions. And then, so the way that we'll kind of handle a little bit of today, Olivia and I will give some information about resume writing, and then in the time that we have at the end, and can allow for some breakout sessions, so you can ask some follow-up questions as well. And so with that, I will go ahead and share my screen and go here. All right. So again, this is the kind of part of our series of things that we're going to be covering about resume writing. So what we're planning to kind of cover today to get you ready for career fair is resume writing for public health in general. So just talk about goals, some of the key differences between resumes and CVs. Some of you may have seen and gotten this information before, but it's still good, I think, to have a review of that. Talk about the different resume styles and the content that can be in there, the different parts of the resume and the sections, and then just kind of overall suggestions of information that we think it's good for you to focus on. And then we're going to go into talking about resume writing for the career fair. So I thought it was a good idea to kind of talk about too. So some of you might be getting your resume ready for like a resume book, but then for the day of the career fair and actually using Brazen and stuff like that, what are the things there? How is it different, revised, styles and things like that. And so with that, like I say, we'll have time afterwards for you to do some breakouts with us as well. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Olivia to do the share, to talk about writing resumes for public health.
Absolutely. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us, as Paul said. Let's see. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Yep, okay, good. So I'm going to be talking about writing resumes for public health and what exactly that looks like, and how you can best approach the resume as from the perspective of the content as well as the format. So just getting started, I want you to consider, what is the goal of the resume, right? What is the purpose that you are writing it? A lot of times people will think, that purpose, of course, is you want to submit it to the particular job that you're applying for. But really, you want to consider the fact that the purpose of the resume is to get an interview. So the interview is essentially a step in the process, just like the resume itself is. So most people don't get hired because they have a great resume. However, a great resume will bring you a step closer to getting the job. So the whole process has different components along the way. When you're constructing your resume, you always want to keep in mind two things, and you'll hear me say this often, which is to make sure that it is relevant and that it is clear. You don't want to leave any questions from whoever is looking over it. And that usually is because that people who are going to be looking at your resume, they may spend at most, I'd say 30 to 90 seconds reviewing it. So you want to bring out the most relevant pieces of information and allow them to be able to see it quite quickly. So before getting started with your resume, or if you already have one and you're looking to update it, I think that you should ask these questions. So who is my intended audience? Who am I writing the resume for? And we'll discuss that a little bit later. But then also ask yourself, what is my biggest selling piece, right? So what do I have that is the most marketable? What are some of the experiences, the training that I've had, or the skill sets that I would really like to put out there so that whoever is looking at it will be able to see that right away? And then also, what resume format would you like to use? This is, of course, if you are going back and looking at revising your resume, you always can change the format of that so that it can fit most appropriately to what you're applying to. We'll discuss a little bit later about what format and style looks like for the resume, though. And then ask yourself, do I have a job or position announcement to refer to? This essentially is going to be like a roadmap for you. So it is your guide to know what you should include in your resume, or what are the things you should be highlighting. They are very specifically asking you of these things. So you just want to make sure that you're touching on those points when you're constructing the resume. And then lastly, how many pages do I want to have in the resume? I know it's commonly heard that you would want to have just a one-page resume, but there are instances in which you might have a two-page resume. And so we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. I also know that there are particular industries, so say if it was like consulting, that may necessarily want you to have a one-page resume versus a federal government resume, which may be a lot longer because you're including the full extent of the work that you've done. Okay, so I also want to address some of the key differences between the resume and the CV because there's quite a few misconceptions here. One that I really want to point out to you is that the CV is not a longer version of the resume and vice versa, right? When you are looking at these documents, consider that they actually have different goals. So the goal of the resume is to construct a professional identity, and the goal of a CV is going to lean towards constructing a scholarly identity. And so that's what really makes up these documents and the differences that they have. Now, they're very similar in the fact that they are factual and they are providing information about you and your experiences. It's how you're sharing out those experiences. So whereas the resume is going to lean a little bit more to specification, right? It's summarizing your experiences and your education, and it's really tailoring it to the position announcement. And that's why I shared, do you have an announcement or position description to look at? Because that's going to allow you to kind of go in and highlight specific experiences that you've had. Whereas with the CV, you're looking at including information from more of a complete perspective, right? So you want to talk about all of your education and your training. You don't necessarily have to tailor this document. You may not have a lot of emphasis on the action verbs that you use. And that really is because there's a different goal here when you're constructing the documents. The length of it is also going to depend on the type of document that it is. As I shared, 1 to 2 pages is what you'll usually see. Where with the CV, though it is going to be longer, it's not longer just for the sake of being longer. It's because that you want to have all of those experiences included to really show the full breadth of your work. And then also, who is your intended audience? So this is one of the questions that I suggested that you consider, because this is also going to help you when you are working on your resume. When you're considering the fact that for the resume, you're going to want to send it out to individuals that are at organizations and companies, right? This may be a hiring manager. This may be someone who's on the recruiting team. That's going to look very differently than if you're sending it for academic positions or for research, or even if you're applying to a PhD program, right? Because you may have faculty persons who's looking at this versus someone who may be hiring you on for an opportunity. And then as I shared before, how long is the resume going to be reviewed versus the CV? Because the resume is expected to be tailored, because they do have that very specific position description, they're going to be looking at it very quickly and trying to find the most relevant pieces of information. So that's why you want to make sure that it's readily available to them. This could be in the structuring of your resume, where you're highlighting the most important pieces at the top of the resume, or even how you're pulling out your particular skill sets in your content. Okay. So resume style. So after you've asked yourself these questions, you have an understanding of what the difference is, and you're getting ready to update or create the document. You also want to look at the style that you want to use for it. So there's 3 different styles that I recommend. The first one is the one that most people are familiar with. It is the chronological or reverse chronological order. And that is when you're listing pretty much all of your experiences, and you're doing it including the first one to be the most recent experience that you've had, and then do it in reverse and so forth. And so because most people are familiar with this, especially employers and recruiters, this is an advantage because they know this format. It's been used for quite a while, but it also can present a disadvantage, right? Because if you're listing all of your experiences and doing it in reverse chronological order, you may not have the most relevant pieces of information at the top of the resume for whomever to read right away when they're looking at it. So to address that, you might want to use a functional resume. And the functional resume essentially allows you to break your experiences down by categories, right? It has an emphasis on the transferable skills, and it really kind of hones in on the different types of experiences that you've had. So you might see this show up in your experience section as a research experience or international experience, or however you want to group different experiences that you've had. Where the disadvantage with this is that it's not something that a lot of employers are as familiar with, and it doesn't necessarily allow you to kind of break out your information by dates to kind of show what organization that you got this information or that you've learned this from and what time period. To approach that, I really think that it's important to utilize the hybrid method. And what that is just as it sounds, it's a combination between the chronological format and the functional format. If you can see over here in the example, you'll notice that there are some, there's some separation, right? So you have that public health experience section, really bringing attention to that particular understanding or skill set that you have. And then it also does include really important information like the order in which it happened, right? So the dates are there as well as the organization and then the title in which they've done this work, right? This is helpful for a lot of public health students because public health can be so broad and you might need to move things around on your resume to really emphasize certain experiences for different positions that you might have. So it's really nice to be able to bring it together in this way. Now, in addition to the resume style, you also want to consider your resume format. These are really fine details, but they go a long way. When I mentioned in the beginning that the resume needs to be relevant, it also needs to be clear. So when someone is looking at your resume, the very first impression they get is how it is structured, right? Is it neat? Is it easy to read? So this is going to kind of go towards the font that you're using and the font size, even the spacing that you have on your resume. You don't want to have large unnecessary gaps. And on the other end, you don't want to have things too close together that it's hard to read. Your margins are going to matter, the alignment of how you have information. So that's something that can quickly be picked up. And then also the utilization of the emphasizing tools. I recommend not overusing these because the idea is that you're supposed to bring emphasis to them. And so if you're using them too much, then it kind of takes away from that purpose. This is something that you can focus on a little bit more after you've kind of worked out your content for your resume, and maybe you're going through and you're editing it and you're fine tuning things. Okay, so now that you've looked at the formatting of the resume and the style, you really want to consider how am I conveying my experiences, my skill sets, and my qualifications. This method for the sentence structure is something that I commonly call the action verb what or how or who method. And so what this does, it allows you to make sure that every sentence that you are writing is showing what you've done, right? What has happened, but also showing the impact of your work. So every sentence within the resume should always start with an action verb. And then that action verb is going to tell something. It's either going to tell what, it's going to tell how you did it or who you did it with. And the example here, it's actually a who. So you'll see that I've highlighted the action verb as collaborated. And then collaborated with who? With faculty to calculate score and graph collected observation data. So it's able to answer that question. You don't want to leave whoever's looking at the resume with questions about the extent of your work or why you did the work or the impact that the work has had. Another way in which that you can do this that I recommend, which is quantifying your experiences. So where you can, adding in numbers to really show the extent of your work or show the capacity of something. Even with collaborating with faculty, if you collaborated with several faculty right before faculty, you can say how many, right? You can put in the number to really show that you've built these relationships with, maybe it's been 5 faculty, maybe it's been 10. These are just ways that you can specify and really show measurable outcomes. So the fact that you were able to do this with 10 sets of collected observational data may look very differently if you did it with 30 or so forth. So hitting home on how you've done something, what you've done or who you've done it with, but then also asking yourself, to what extent have I done this work? Can I quantify this? This can also be seen as percentages, right? So if you're doing something and you're able to say that you've impacted the work and it is increased by 10%, that is something also that you can include with your sentences. In the resume content, as I stated, you want to start it with action verbs. And so there are a lot of action verbs that you can use. I encourage using strong ones because they really elevate your language. They're going to show the impact of your work. And so down here with the examples, all of these are synonyms, and some of them hit on different definitions in certain ways. But the ones in the red are really just another way to kind of elevate that language, right? So of course you can say assisted, you can say provided, supported, and developed, but it has a greater impact when someone reads that you fostered, right? Or that you cultivated a relationship versus that you developed it. Of course, you want to make sure that you're using it in the proper context and the right definition, even though it's a synonym. Sometimes they have multiple definitions that are not necessarily the same, but these are ways in which you can kind of just take the resume to the next level as you're working through it. So in our career planner, we do have action verb examples. This is just a small snapshot of those to kind of give you an idea of the many ways in which you can describe your experiences. Again, this is something that you can go back in, and when you're fine tuning the resume, maybe asking yourself, is there a way that I can elevate this particular action verb? You can do that. But first, you want to make sure that you have your resume structured really well, that you've taken a look at what type of style that you want to use and how you want to approach it. And then also considering, what is this particular position that I'm applying for? What is it that they're looking for? So that way you can best articulate that in your experiences. So before we kind of go a little bit deeper into what the resume will look like from a content and structure perspective, does anyone have any questions? I don't know if there's any in the chat that are able to be shared out.
Yeah, just one in the chat about the using past tense, or for when to use the verb tense. So essentially your thought should be, is anything you're currently doing should be, your action verb should be written in present tense. Anything you've done in the past, words should be written in past tense.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay. Is there another one?
Nope, you're good.
Okay. So when looking at how to do the sections of your resume, you should definitely start with the profile. The profile is essentially like a written elevator pitch. So think of it as a snapshot of your professional identity, your experiences, your skill sets, and your qualifications. This is helpful because it allows the person that's reading the resume to basically have an understanding of what they can expect, right? As they go on through the rest of the document, these are maybe some of the most important pieces that they'll be able to see that come up through your different experiences. Here, you do want to make sure that it is just a summary, so it should not be more than 2 to 3 sentences long. It's also something that you might find that you would do towards the end. So after you've actually built out your resume and you've taken a look at your experiences, you're then able to go back and create this profile, right? It's a summary. So you'd probably have to create the resume first with your experiences and your education, some of the professional development experiences that you've had, and then create the profile, because this is going to bring everything together. If there is technical skills or technical language that are going to be very relevant to that position, I also recommend including that there. Then the next section to follow will be your education section. Here, I want you to notice that it does include the concentration or the track, the relevant coursework as well. This is something that's really nice to be able to highlight so that they see that you are currently acquiring this knowledge, and you can actually build upon that relevant coursework, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But I also want you to notice how it's listed. So regardless of what format you use, you always want to list your education in reverse chronological order, meaning that the degree that you are currently working towards is going to be what comes first. And then moving beyond college, you will always make sure that the degree that you got most recently will be the first one that they see there within the education section. You'll also notice that the institution is there, and you want to make sure that you are abbreviating it if you plan on using it elsewhere within the resume, so that they kind of have an understanding. And that's what most titles as well. You will also see that the GPA is listed in both the master's as well as the bachelor. What I recommend here is that the GPA is optional. It's not necessarily going to count against you if you do not have it on the resume, but it could benefit you if you do decide to include it. However, make sure that if you're going to include it, that for your graduate studies, it's a 3.6 or higher that you're including, and that for your undergraduate studies, it's a 3.2 or higher. Lastly, I will share that for this, you want to make sure that you choose to have both. So if you include it for your master's, then you should include it for your bachelor's. So that way it shows that you're including both pieces of information. Sometimes it can look like there's something that maybe you're trying not to show if you don't include it for one degree, but you include it for the other. Again, if you choose not to have it here at all, that is perfectly fine, and it will not count against you. The public health training section really gives you the opportunity to kind of expound upon the experiences that you currently are having through your academic training. So what I mentioned when you have in the relevant coursework section of your education, here's an opportunity to kind of go a little bit in depth, right? To emphasize the knowledge that you are currently acquiring, because that's going to matter to the individuals looking at your resume. It's also one of your greatest selling points. It's your education, right? The fact that you are currently doing this work. So you can frame it in a way like you would with your experiences, where of course you have the institution, but instead of a title, as far as like your position title, it has the course listed here that you've taken. And then if you notice with the different bullet points here, it's explaining, some of the things that occurred during the class. You can get this information from looking at your course syllabi. They usually have learning outcomes or objectives, things that essentially they want you to have an understanding of by the end of that term. So what I usually say is that if you've taken the course and you have passed it and done well in it, you're able to say that you've acquired this knowledge, so that you can include it on your resume here. You just want to make sure that you change it over to that standard format for the sentences of a resume and not necessarily exactly how it's written within the syllabi. Okay, so I'm going to break down the different experience types. So we talked about the chronological, the functional, and the hybrid, just so you have an idea of what that can look like and how it shows up on the resume. But first, I want to highlight what I shared earlier, which is the sentence structure. So here you'll see that it starts with that action verb, and then it goes into the impact, right? So it says contributed, and then I ask contributed to what, or contributed how, or contributed with who. Right here, it's going to be a what. So it's contributed to what? The student group oversight, volunteering, and coordinating events and funding. Usually, if you follow this method with creating your sentences, you'll make sure that you hit on the impact and that it has that typical structure that you see with a resume sentences. Other things that you might think about including in your experience section can be internships, community involvement work, if you've had any fellowship opportunities. I want you to remember that experience is not necessarily aligned to just being paid. Any experience that you've had and that you've acquired knowledge with, as long as it's relevant to what you're applying to, you definitely can include it here on the resume. So just make sure that you're considering all of those experiences and how you might place them here. Then we have the functional for the functional style for the experience section. What you'll notice here is that, of course, it's broken down by the different categories. So there's international experience and there's research experience, but also it does not have the particular organization or the job title that you saw in the chronological format. At the bottom, it does include work history. So it just looks a little bit different. It doesn't specify exactly where they got this research experience. You might be able to infer that based on the type of organizations that they worked on, but it's not laid out as clearly with the chronological, or like the chronological version. However, it is still there. There's a greater emphasis on the skills that are required here, right? In these functional areas and bringing that attention to whomever is looking at the document. You'll also see that these action verbs sometimes can have more than one at the very beginning. And sometimes the action verb brings out a skill set. Not everyone will do that, but this one here where it says identified, compiled, and mapped, it really speaks to the attention to detail. So your ability to do these things, what's required of you is an attention to detail, right? An understanding of that work. So you can utilize your action verbs to also maybe highlight some transferable skills that you have as well, in addition to the technical information that the rest of the sentence provides. And then there is the hybrid. So the hybrid experience, like I shared with you, it gives you that opportunity to kind of bring things together and marry the two between functional and chronological. So it does have that separation where it's categorizing information, public health experience, research experience. However, within that, you do also see that it has that specification that you see in the chronological experience section, which has the employer listed as well as the position title. And if it's not an employer, just the organization in which that you've done that work with. Okay, so you would want to include publications and presentations if they are relevant. Oftentimes it's thought that this only belongs in the CV, and that's not the case. It's more so of including it based on how much it will align to what you're applying to. So if it is, experiences that you have in your CV as far as your publications and presentations, there you want to include all of them, right? Every one that you've ever done or every publication that you have, you want to include it. This, you're just going to make it a lot more specific. So it does have a place on the resume. It's just how you are situating the information. It's also going to be nice to really show that you have those written communication skills as well as those oral communication skills and that you've exercised them. And then one of the last sections that you might see on the resume is the professional development. This is really helpful because it's kind of like a catch-all section. It allows you to include other pieces of information that contribute to your professional identity, but may not be as specific to the experiences that you've had listed above, or other areas, right? But it does kind of show you in a light where it shows all of the skill sets that you have, right? It's showing you in a more complete way. So here you see the language skills, some of the technical computer skills, even memberships that an individual might have. I want to bring your attention to the travel abroad section though, because I think this is something that can be really beneficial for individuals, especially if you're interested in international work, right? So if you've had the opportunity to travel abroad, be it for academic or personal reasons, just having that opportunity to maybe go over to another area and become accustomed, right, to what their culture is like and immersing yourself in that environment can really say a lot about you. So it's definitely something that's worth including in the professional development section. And then as well as your volunteer opportunities, I always recommend where you have them and they're relevant to include community involvement. And this kind of really speaks to your commitment to the work, right? The fact that you're willing to do it without necessarily getting paid compensation just shows a little bit more about you and their assessment of you when looking at your documents. So some suggestions that I have, we've of course talked about the education being your biggest selling piece and ways in which you can kind of hone in on that through your public health training. What I really want to bring your attention to is the idea of a master resume. So we've talked about tailoring the resume, making it as specific as possible to the position description, but sometimes that may include removing things out of the resume, right? Of course, you might reposition it to make it specific, but there may be actual experiences that you need to remove altogether. So this is why it's important to have a master resume. And by that, I mean a resume that includes every experience that you've ever had. And this is helpful because sometimes we forget the many things that we've done, but also when we're looking at a position description, you can compare it against your master resume and really see what experience have I had that kind of goes towards this particular responsibility or this particular qualification. And then it's very easily to just kind of copy it from that master and paste it into the tailored version that will actually be sent off to apply for that job. So a master resume is really just a way to make sure that you are not losing the information about yourself and about your experiences that you've had over time, right? It's an internal document for you as a means to keep track of your experiences, but it's not the one that you're necessarily going to submit for particular positions. Right beneath it, you'll see that you'll create themes from your master resume. So you may have one that's more centralized around research opportunities, maybe one that's a little bit specific to healthcare, something that's more along the lines of an NGO or nonprofit organization. And then also when looking at the resume, it may take some time for you to really polish it. So you of course want to establish, the different components of it, the structure of your resume, your content, your format, but go back over it again before submitting it and make sure that you've hit some of these components, right? That it's tailored, there aren't any grammatical errors, that you aren't using a lot of fonts that are fancy or colors or pictures that can be a distraction from your actual experiences that are going to be relevant to what they're looking for. And then again, going back to the idea of having a master resume and then having thematic resumes, making sure that you're saving different versions and those versions are going to go towards that particular position. Any questions with that? Are there any questions in the chat, or if anyone wants to be able to come off mute, ask questions, you definitely can do that.
Yeah, so I put a couple of answers here into the chat, but I can bring it up for everybody else to know. So question was about how do you describe personal travel and the travel abroad? And I just said it's a good idea to include all. It's also a good way to be able to demonstrate and show cultural competencies to work with people in different countries. So I don't know if Olivia, you got any more to add to that?
No, that's exactly what I would say.
Okay.
I've had the question before, should we include it if it's not study abroad? And I would say, yes, you can include it and just list it under the general term of travel abroad.
Yeah. And then someone asked a question too about research jobs. When should we submit a resume or CV? I said, usually for research, it's better for a CV, but a blended resume and CV. And then the follow-up question is what is a blended resume and CV? So I can give that answer in terms of what I'm thinking, or if you want to jump in too.
If you want to give the answer, Paul.
Yeah. So it's not that really complicated. It's really more to kind of think elements of a CV. So again, going back to that, the differences that Olivia was talking about. A lot of times you want to think of it as is the CV can be more exhaustive, but it can be tailored. And usually a resume we're advising, it's a really good idea to tailor it as much as you can. So the idea is that think about it in the light of your reviewer or whoever's looking at it. And if it's for a research role, there's probably certain things they're looking for. Not only the things that you've been doing, but also who you've been doing the work with, what publications you have, what are the different activities that you're doing. So, the blended is just to kind of take elements that you see in a CV and take elements you see in a resume and seeing what way you think it would best suit you and what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Any other questions?
Looks like somebody had, are the dates of international travel important or just where you traveled? I would say just where you traveled.
Yep.
Would be fine. Okay, and someone mentioned references. So typically references are going to be a separate document that you're going to include as part of your application section. It's usually not necessary to include it in the resume. It's not necessary to include it as part of the resume document. But those are usually going to be individuals that are going to be contacted after you've gone through some sort of interview process.
And I will also say with that, with some applications, especially those online, they may ask for a references. So they may have a space for you to upload different documents and it'll actually say references and then allow you to upload it. However, if they don't ask for your references, but they do allow you to upload multiple documents, I still recommend including professional references because that's very helpful for them. And then it also kind of shows that you're taking that initiative.
So question here, if one of your job positions was not relevant to the job description, would you still include it? If not, how would you explain that gap in your resume?
Sure. So that's actually where using the different type of styles for resume, like the functional or the hybrid, comes into play because it's less focused on the time frame. When you're doing it in reverse chronological, it makes it very apparent that there's a gap, right? If you exclude something. You don't pick up on that as much if you choose to do the hybrid. So I would recommend doing the hybrid, excuse me, making it more about the experience, right? And the functional areas in which you have gained knowledge in, which will still allow you to put those time frames. I will also say that that's something that you can, share within an interview if there is a particular question about that. But usually with the resume, they're going to focus more on the information being relevant. So it'd be more important to have the relevant pieces there than to simply include it just because you don't want it to look like it has a gap.
Should we include detailed published paper information in the resume and when we apply for research jobs, or just say 3 papers published, etc.?
So if you're applying for a research position, as Paul shared, you usually want to utilize a CV. And with the CV, you would include all of the publications that you've been a part of. With the resume, you would just include the ones that are relevant to what they're looking for. But if it's research specific, then it'll be there by the nature of the CV needing to have that information.
Yeah, and also say too, if you want to do selected publications, that's also too perfectly fine. And then one question here, for corporate resumes, is having a profile or summary necessary?
So when you say corporate, is there a specific industry you're referring to?
Nope, nothing there in the chat yet.
Okay, that's fine. So what I would say—
Consulting, I'm sorry, she said consulting.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, that's very helpful. So consulting, usually those organizations typically prefer a one-page resume. So I would say if your experiences are going to outweigh the profile, then really just stick to those relevant experiences because you are limited to space in that way. In that particular instance, it's not necessary and that they're really kind of looking for those skill sets and for you to bring those out through the experiences that you have. You have anything to add, Paul?
Nope, that was exactly it.
Okay.
And then one question, should we include the current graduate GPA, even though we don't know how it's going to compare to the final GPA graduation? It could go down or be higher.
Yeah, that's fine. Because it's optional, it's not something that you really have to be concerned about that it would look different later. What they're looking for is what you currently have. All you have to give them is what you've acquired thus far. So you can include it as it is. After the fact, I would say if it does go down and that's a concern of yours, you can just completely omit it from the resume because you don't have to have it there.
Yep. All right, so nothing else there in the chat. I think that was good.
Okay. I'm going to stop share so that
Perfect.
you can.
Yep. Okay, so there we go. So Olivia gave us a great kind of overview of all the things that we kind of think are really important all the way for resumes. And some of this is going to be a little repetitive, but some of this is going to be in particular for the career fair. So obviously, this is our second year doing a virtual career fair. It's different than an in-person career fair. If you've been to an in-person career fair before, you're going to know that you're going to have a limited amount of time to talk to the individual that you're meeting with face to face, and then it's going to be the same thing. There's going to be time limited activities that you're going to be able to, engagement you're going to be able to have with the representative. So we think about resumes for the career fair. I'm going to stay short. So the idea, keep it to one page. So if there are things that you can kind of shorten down, take out, remove that are unnecessary. And again, the main purpose of this is for you to get a future meeting or do some follow-up about future potential positions. So again, it goes back to the same things, making it relevant, making it easy to read, even a short amount of time for the person that you're talking to look at it. And they might be looking at it just in the moment that you're there, or they may have looked at, as you're talking, they're gonna be looking at it. So again, they're gonna be looking at this very quickly, giving them about 20 to 25 seconds to kind of scan through everything, trying to be as I want to say as thorough, but also as broad as you possibly can in that short amount of time. So it might require you to kind of rethink some of those sections and help you to think of, well, what are the really important things I want to make sure I'm mentioning? So again, deciding for yourself the style that you think is going to work best. Chronological has its advantages, functional has its advantages, hybrid has its advantages. And in terms of what I'm going to kind of show you, at least the resume for the career fair, I'm going to lean more towards some of these chronological kind of elements to it. But you can incorporate these things in any way that you think that you can. All right. So when we think about converting things down to one page, I still think having the profile or summary is going to be really helpful. When we think about education, that's always still going to want to be placed at the top. It's still going to want to be placed before any type of experience. It's highlighting, the education, probably okay to remove the relevant coursework. And again, the GPA is your personal choice. It doesn't have to be there. When it comes to public health training, it's not necessary, but it can be useful information to have in there. And I can show you ways to have it look different than it would be in your normal 2-page resume you may be sending out, or 2-page or longer resume as well. When it comes to kind of the experience section, trying to limit what you have maybe to only 1 or 2 bullet points for the most current position and the most relevant position. If you want to, you can divide everything into one section or keep everything under just experience. There could be this kind of understood sense that your experience, no matter what, it's going to be public health related because they are coming to a public health career fair talking to public health students. So just saying experience is broad enough to be able to have that if you want to. If it's applying for a particular job, then I'm going to encourage you to have a more labeled experience. But for this purpose, just experience might work. If you need to save space, so typically margins, you're kind of maximizing as much white space as you possibly can. So reset your your margin settings in your Word document to 1/2 inch all the way around. And use up as much of that space there as you possibly can. If you want to, adding publications, I think is a fine thing. Adding 1 publication or 2, if you think that's really something you want somebody to pay attention to, that would be there. And then looking at your professional development section, what are the ways that you can shrink that down just to really hone in on what are the really important elements of skills that I have, memberships that I've done, things that I've done. These are just little bits of information that I'm hoping would be in a conversation, be more talking points that I would share and talk a little bit more about with somebody if they're looking at my resume or they want to know more about me. So this would be an example of what a profile would kind of look like in a normal resume. Lots of information, maybe some bulleted points of kind of key things you want somebody to look at. But if I was to rewrite this as a profile for the career fair, I'm just going to cut down on maybe what are not necessary pieces of information. So I'm going to pull in more of what I think are the broader things. So the idea I'm going to keep it in one sentence or 2 or 3 lines on the page. So again, I'm trying to maximize space on the page. I'm trying to focus in on keywords. So things like international health or epidemiology or vaccine science. These are the things that I really want them to see. You can bold these words if you want, but you don't have to. But again, it's your preference of how it is you want to have it laid out. And again, I always think it's a stronger starting with good information about your degree information, kind of what degree program that you're in. And again, it's the last addition to the resume after the design and the content is done. So it's still going to be that same practice. Focus more on the education, the experience, the professional development, get that laid out the way that you want, and then have your profile or your summary be the last item that you add to your document so that everything aligns to what you have in there as well. So when we talk about education, so again, kind of this layout of the information, degree, expected date of completion, maybe some coursework that you're going to complete, GPA, if you're doing a certificate as well. And if you see this year, this takes up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe up to 10 lines within the document. So that's a lot of space to kind of use for education. And again, this idea, if you're comfortable with doing that, I'm going to, by all means, encourage you to list it this way. But if you want to be it more kind of, succinct and to the point, let's just put the degree information. Let's just put the degrees that you're doing. Now, you'll notice one thing that's here is like I've removed the school. So the other thing you can think about with this is they know because of this is, you're at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. So you don't have to include that. But maybe you want to include, here's the degree that I'm getting. Here's the certificate I'm getting specialty in. You're going to have to include your undergraduate institution because, it's not presumed that everybody's coming from Hopkins. But this is another way, if you like, you can kind of save some space by just putting the degree titles. I would discourage the abbreviations because oftentimes employers may not know. They think public health as a whole, they just think everybody has the MPH. Well, we know within our school, it's an MPH and an MSPH. So if you want to show the differences, I think writing out the full degree is a good idea. And again, with the certificate, it doesn't have to be there, but I think it's useful. But I also think, having the degree that you're pursuing and the date that it's going to be completed is going to be good. Employers are going to be curious to know when you're available. So I think this is another added component of this too, is like, saying, well, my degree is completed in May 2023. If I'm doing an MSPH, I am eligible and ready to work beginning in May or June of 2022. And for those of you that are graduating in May, put that date of completion as well. All right, so for public health training, this would be a way that we would normally suggest to have this. You put the school, you put the course title, you put bullet points describing what you've done and things like that. And again, this is good and useful information, but it may take up too much space to fit onto one page. So if we were to write this a little bit differently, it would just be 2 bullet points, but it's still going to cover the majority of the things that you have in those courses that you think are good. You can remove the course titles because maybe for an employer, that's not going to be interested as necessary to include. Maybe it's going to include the time when those courses were taken. But you just want to list the activities that you've done that were completed in the class. It can be in 1 to 2 bullet points. Think about the most relevant things that you can. But again, this is written in such a way to where it aligns with a way that employers looking at information, which is a bulleted point, and then looking for action verbs to kind of describe. And then if you have to get into more details about what you did to complete this, then you can explain that in the conversation. All right, so then with experience. So again, this idea is, has a title, has a time when things occurred, it has a place, you have bullet points describing what you've done. And this is a way that, usually you wanna always be thinking about presenting this information. But if we're thinking about it for a career fair, we're trying to make it more streamlined and more focused and more towards one page, then we're going to cut down on some of the content that we're sharing. And maybe we're going to be selective in where we're choosing our bullet points. And we're going to be selective in where it is that we're presenting this information. So part of what I think about to say is all experience counts. So don't dismiss something just because it was a volunteer role, or don't dismiss something because it's something you don't think could have been important. You could get away with in this section of just putting titles, places, dates, and no content. But if you feel like you have a role that you've done and something that you have completed that it's like, I really think this is important to share, then you're going to have some bullet points to describe it. And if you want to, you can have the top position that you're going to have there. That's the only one that shares bullet points. And all your other ones are just the different things that I've done along the way. So the idea with this is, be deliberate in what it is that you're sharing, but don't discount something just because it's not a paid position or an actual role. So another thing you can think about here with this kind of experience section is experience can count for lots of different things. So it could be internships, it could be fellowships, it could be what you're doing to work on your capstone or your kind of final project for your degree. And you can give yourself a title of like graduate student researcher and then describing some of the things you've done there. So be creative with this. There is no kind of like right or wrong in the number that you should include, but I would say, whatever you can fit into that one page, do what you can. And then, if you've included everything you'd want to, well, where can I add the most bullet points? And then, have it know that for each thing that I have here, I'm hopefully going to have a broader discussion about it. And then afterwards, I can send a more thorough document that has all my bullet points about every position that I have. And then professional development. So you see this kind of covers lots of different things: language skills, computer skills, all the levels of proficiency and things like that. And again, this takes up a lot of lines on the page. But if we were to kind of consolidate this and kind of pull this down, only include the most impressive skills that you can. Try to limit this just to 2 lines of information if you can. Usually computer or technical skills are the best ones to include. But if you're looking for international roles, anything about languages would be good. And then non-academic training and certificates that you've done. So anything that you just want to add in, it's a software that you use in another place or something like that, by all means include that in here as well. But if you can limit this to just a couple lines of information, it's still making the same impact, but you're just saving that space on the document as well. Any questions on this kind of more consolidated, shortened down version of a resume, the 1-page type of option?
Did you say we do not have to include our profile when we are tailoring the resume for the career fair? Because I don't know I can't remember what is it.
Yeah, so I think the profile, I think it's helpful to have, but it's not a necessary thing. The necessary things are education experience, but you don't have to have the profile in there. But the profile is just a good way to kind of introduce and write in a narrative form pieces of information you want to have. But in the 1 page, I think it's useful. It's just a consolidated one, so 1 or 2 sentences. But in your regular resume that you would send out in follow-up or something like that, you can have the fuller one as well.
Thank you.
There is a question in the chat. It says, I submitted 1 resume to the fair. Is it possible to revise it and resubmit?
Yeah, so like if you submitted a resume with the resume books, that is the one, like we have said, we'll pass on to employers ahead of time. How many of them will look through every single one of them? I can't guarantee it, but they'll have it as maybe reference to go back to afterwards. Leading into the career fair itself and or through your Brazen profile, you'll be able to upload whatever version of the resume that you want for that day. Now, what you might not be able to do is take one resume for one employer and a different resume for a different one. But what you can allow to do is to have a resume that you can just use as an add-on to what you're doing and talking to somebody. So yes, you can update it and change it, and send multiple versions as long as your information is not completely different. But if as long as it's in the same realm of what you have in one and you're sharing with another one, that's perfectly fine to resubmit.
So Paul, I want to clarify that. So they can't resubmit for the resume book, but for inside of Brazen for the day of, they can upload their resume again, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And again, once the resume book closes, I mean, we're gonna take that information and pass it on to our employer partners. But in your Brazen profile, you'll still be able to upload it, the same one if you want, or a different one.
There's another question that says, can we still submit a resume if we're not able to make the career fair?
Yes, yes. Definitely you can put one into the resume book if you're not able to come.
So Paul, I have a question. Which version of the resume are we submitting for the book, for the resume book? Is it the short version, the 1 page, or the normal one?
So to me, that's going to be up to you to decide. If I were to give a suggestion of which one, my suggestion would probably be your longer one, because that's going to have more information. And then the shorter one would be the one that you can use during the career fair itself to go over information. And then you can reference back to your longer one.
Thank you.
I want to circle back to the question about submitting the resume if you're not able to make it to the career fair. Also, if you're not able to make it, I highly recommend looking at those lists of employers and just identifying organizations that you are interested in speaking with, because you still can reach out to them and just, let them know that you weren't able to make it, but you would like to have the opportunity to share your resume with them or that particular information. That list, I will actually put that link in the chat for everyone. And then also, if you've been receiving and looking at the emails that I've shared out, the one specific to the career fair will have the list of the employers. I think the one that I just sent out today has that linked in there as well. So feel free to go back to the email if you needed it.
Yeah, and I'll just add to, I will be updating the list of the employers that are registered. So Friday was our deadline for employers to sign up for the fair. So we will be updating that list, but I would encourage you to keep checking the page as we get more employers signed up, so you can kind of see who's kind of coming.
The question is, will there be any sessions talking about OPT specifically for international students? By sessions, I'm assuming they prepare for the fair sessions.
So we're not planning to do a prepare for the fair session for international students. However, we can encourage you and share information from our Career Development Academy, where we had a day about international employment options. We have recordings of that, and you can email one of us to get those recordings, or we can kind of put that together in maybe one of our emails that we send out, so you see that.
Also, I will share that if you join us on Wednesday, Paul will be doing a presentation on researching employers for the fair, and that will provide a little bit of information on how you can look them up in Handshake. There you'll find more details about them, and some of those details is that the employers will include like the work authorization, so whether they accept certain work authorization or not. So definitely attend that as well.
Okay.
When you try to sign up, are you referring to the link that was sent in the email this morning as far as signing up for the fair?
Yeah. So I clicked the link in the email, which connects to Brazen. And then there's a choice of how we want to log in or register. And the first choice is sign up with Johns Hopkins. And when I click that, there's an SSO error.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let us look into that. We might have to find out from our folks at Brazen, but we'll try to do some follow up.
Absolutely. Thank you for letting us know that.
Well, it looks like a couple of people are staying here to try incognito.
Yeah, it does say that. I just went through. It does say that at the underneath the error message.
And the career passport also, today they had a session, but I was not able to enter. It said it is not available. Webinar is not available.
You said the,
Or, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just saying, you said the career passport session?
Yeah, today they had at 9 o'clock that I tried to enter. It was not allowing. They said the webinar is not available.
I think we'll have to find out from our partners with Passport Career what happened there. So just so everybody's aware, the Passport Career webinars are ones that we are just promoting through Passport Career. They're not ones that we are responsible for presenting on. So if there's anything that was missed or something couldn't happen, we'll have to follow up with them directly, or you can email them. I think they have a on their website, but we can find out about that.
This is just to let you know. Yeah.
Any other questions?
So just a couple, other little things to make sure that you're aware of. We will be doing a virtual Resumania tomorrow. So if anybody does have questions after getting this information today, they want one of us to look at your resume very quickly, we can do that. And then, like Olivia said, we'll have a researching employer session on Wednesday. And then various drop-in hours at the end of this week for both myself, Olivia, and Caroline to be available for any questions that you may have on anything related to career fair wise. So, from resumes or just employers and stuff like that as well. And so we'll continue to send out those links of when we're available and schedules and things like that, so you can see that. But, and then if you just have general questions, you can feel free to email us as well. But we'll have, a schedule of things when we're available, and we'll follow up in anybody that's registered for today with an email. So you have all those things there as well too.
And to answer the question about drop-in hours, how to access them. So we're going to have different times, as Paul was sharing, and I will send out another email that will have like the breakdown of what that will look like. And so we each have our own individual Zoom meeting link. And so you can just click that link at that time, and then you'll be able to access the drop-in hours that way. Paul, we're doing them on the individual first come, first serve basis, correct?
Yes, correct.
Yes. Okay. So just so everyone knows that the drop-in hours they're similar to in-person in the way that we'll be meeting with one individual at a time. And so if we're already meeting with a student, then you'll be in the waiting room. So if we were in person, it would be like you were in the waiting room of an office. And that's just to allow us to have those conversations in a confidential manner with individuals. And then also expect, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I meant to clarify that. So the way that we kind of set it up, we will do what we can to do individual one-on-ones, but we're going to try to keep it, if there's questions, for everybody to kind of hear. If you have particular questions that you don't want anybody else to kind of know about, we can, set it up as a separate thing, but it'll be a combination. So it just really depends on kind of who's there, but we will, as people come in, we'll talk to you and things like that, but don't be alarmed if somebody is there, listening to your question you may have as well.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I'm going to put the link. There was a question about submitting the resume and if Brazen was the only place to do that. So I'm going to put the link for the resume book. The resume book is through Handshake, and so that's where you submit it. But for the day of the fair, you can also submit that fair version of your resume in Brazen.
All right. So what we're gonna is, for the last kind of half an hour, we were going to set aside time if anybody has questions. So I'm gonna stop the recording now.